Today in Math 30-2, we're going to look at topic 8.3, the graphs of sinusoidal functions. In example 1, the graph of a sinusoidal function is shown on the right. What we're going to do is look for these characteristics from the graph. The maximum, the minimum, where the midline is, the range, the amplitude, the period, and for good measure, the domain. Now, as you can see, great difficulty in drawing this graph, making sure that I get the period right, the maximum points right, and the minimums right. So, from this graph, we can read that the maximum is going to be at 7. The minimum is going to go down to -3. The midline, well, it's got to be halfway between 7 and -3. So how I would find that is I could count up from the bottom and count up from the top, or I could use the maximum plus the minimum divided by 2. The range is going to be y has got to be less than 7, but at the same time y has to be greater than -3. The amplitude is the distance from the middle to the top. So it's going to be, for the midline to the top, is 5. Because the midline is going to be at 2, so 7 minus 2 is 5. Our period is when it repeats. Now this is going to be, sometimes we're going to find it by looking at the bottom to the next bottom, the middle to the next middle, or the top to the top. And what I notice in this graph is that if we went from the bottom point to the next bottom point, that you can tell that it's going to be 180 degrees. Our domain is x is any real number as our graph continues in both directions. Let's do another example. This one's going to be in radians. So when you look at this and graph this, the first graph, your calculator had to be in degree mode. The second one, your calculator had to be in radian mode. In example 2, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at the range, the amplitude, the midline, and the period. Well, the range. Notice that graph is going to range from the lowest of -4 up to a maximum of +2. When we look at amplitude, again, we can look at the max minus the minimum divided by 2, puts the amplitude at 3. The midline is going to be at the maximum plus the minimum divided by 2, which is 2 plus -4 divided by 2, puts the midline at -1. We can draw that in. And now you can see that the period, it starts at 0, it's halfway at 2.5, so therefore the period to get one complete cycle would be 5. And there we have how to read our characteristics from our graph. We're going to do an example here. We're doing a little problem solving. Relating sine functions to oscillating motion, back and forth. For physics, Morgan and Lily had to make a graph of a simple harmonic motion. Morgan swung on a swing, and Liddy used a motion detector to measure her height above the ground over time, as she swung back and forth. The girls then graphed their data as shown. We're asked to interpret the graph, and we're asked how high Morgan is exactly 4 seconds into her swing. So here's our graph. As we plotted our points, we can start examining our information. Interpreting the graph means what's the maximum? What's the minimum? So the maximum, as you can see, is at 2. The minimum is a little bit below 1. We would say the minimum is probably, if it was pretty accurate, 0.8. The range, well, tells me that x is going to be the low of 0.8, or y is going to be the low of 0.8 and a high of 2. So we'd say y is less than or equal to 2, but greater than or equal to 0.8. Next is the midline. Well, the midline has the what equation? Well, if I took the max plus the minimum and divided it by 2, 2 plus 0.8 is 2.8, divided by 2 is 1.4. The amplitude is going to be the max minus the minimum divided by 2, so that would be 1.2 divided by 2 is 0.6. How high is Morgan? Exactly 4 seconds into her period. The period looks like it's going to repeat every 1.5 seconds if we go from the top to the next top to the next top to the next top. B. We're going to interpolate this information from our graph. If we went for 4 seconds to the bottom and then moved across, you can see that it's going to be, when x is 4, y is 1. So we can tell by reading from the graph that exactly 4 seconds into her swing, she's going to be 1 meter off the ground. Your assignment is to do page 506, numbers 1 to 14.